content segment of today's event. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Tadeusz and Francisca as a way to set the scene to today's conversation. So Tad is the founder and exec director of PAREA. He worked previously in organizations such as EBC, such as EFNA, to defend the brain community, the patient voice across Europe. And Francisca is obviously one of the very active member of the team at PAREA. So it's a real pleasure to give you the floor, and I think that you will be starting.
Thank you, Fred. All right, just to make sure I stick to time. Everything is working, well, almost. Let me just switch that. So I hoped I would see my notes, but I think I will not. So let's see. Okay. Yes, so I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of the policy paper that we are launching today. You can see here the title of the paper, and it's really building on this premises that mental health is this foundational layer, and it's really kind of, it underpins every aspect of human life, every aspect of societal functioning. And the paper contrasts this with the scale of the challenges that we have with poor mental health. You can see that the poor mental health is the single largest contributor to ill health, taking over all the kind of major non-communicable diseases, NCDs. And it's important because we focus a lot on mortality, but it's also important to understand what does it mean to live with a condition, how it affects our quality of life. For instance, we know that major depression decreases the quality of life more than diabetes, more than death, more than divorce. And you can see here the data, some more data points, and really the burden, the scale of the burden, becomes clear. We know, for instance, that just 1 in 10 people affected by depression will receive the most optimal, adequate treatment. For me, what stands out from these numbers is especially the recent study from Eurostat, which shows that suicide has now taken over traffic accidents as the leading cause of deaths among young people. 1 in 5 deaths is due to suicide, which I think is such a tragic statistics. And there are, of course, economic consequences to poor mental health, which are enormous. Many of you have heard about this 600 billion euro figure of annual costs, but when you look kind of closer, the majority of these costs is actually productivity losses, which are much bigger than indirect costs. So the losses to Europe's workforce alone far exceed this 140 billion euro reparation loan for Ukraine from the Russian assets that is now being discussed, and it's really showing the scale of the challenges. And you can see that we can, with the right interventions, we can really make major savings. This is a global figure of 4.4 trillion that could be saved by 2050 if we implement and scale effective mental health interventions. Then there is the issue of innovation. When we look at the innovation trends, mental health remains one of the slowest moving areas in medicine, and we are still stuck also within this biomedical framework, which is important, but as we know, it's only a part of the story. So for many decades, we haven't really had any major innovation in the space, and you can see an example here with the EMA that, for instance, in the last 5 years, approved 5 new psychiatric treatments compared to 120 in oncology. And then, of course, it's part of the bigger picture of Europe's overall life science innovation ecosystem decline. One example is that 25 years ago, 1 in new treatments, 1 in 2 new treatments came from Europe, and today it's 1 in 5, and you can, multiple such examples. And then nowhere, again, this situation is more stark and more evident than in mental health, which is still suffering from this structural neglect. And so, as you can see here, psychiatry has the lowest share of commercial trials of all medical fields in the EU. It's at the last position here, just before the other category. And this is a really important context for us now to consider the therapeutic potential of psychedelics. And as you can see, for the first time in decades, we have these transformative solutions, including psychedelics, that are kind of appearing on the scientific horizon. And here you can see phase 2 and phase 3 trials with psychedelic compounds. So there are many dozens of them. And if you look overall at all stages of the development, and not just commercial trials like here, there will be actually, I think, close to 400 clinical trials happening. So this is great news. But unfortunately, only a handful of these trials are happening in Europe. Probably I could show you how many, we could count them on one hand. And of course, we know that the problem isn't exactly a scientific capacity, because Europe has it, but it's the issue with fragmented regulation, is the issue of not enough kind of coordinated approach towards mental health, and the incentives that are too weak or that are not kind of targeted. And here's one example. Since 2017, the Food and Drug Administration in the US granted 6 breakthrough therapies to different psychedelics, different trials. And that means FDA guidance, that means priority review, that means faster path to approval. And in Europe, we have the PRIME, the Priority Medicine Scheme, but it's not nearly as strong a mechanism as this breakthrough therapy designation, and it hasn't really done much to support psychiatry anyway. And it's true that psychedelic companies are not exactly knocking on EMA's doors, but that's exactly the reason why we should provide them with kind of more reasons to come to Europe. And so once we set the stage, the paper, of course, looks at what we can do concretely to reverse these trends. And we recognize that we now stand at this inflection point in Europe. There are discussions on the next EU budget, the 7-year cycle budget, which is going to reach as much as 2 trillion euros. There are discussions on the Competitiveness Fund, Horizon Europe, next EU framework program for research and innovation. And so we think that it's a real opportunity for Europe, and not just to catch up, but to really lead with mental health innovation and turn it into an engine for innovation. So to do this, the first proposal we have is to launch a moonshot, which would make mental health innovation made in Europe, which would support high risk, high reward research, which would build capacity for delivery, and which would make sure that the scientific discoveries are translated into the real equitable access for people affected by mental health conditions. And the moonshot should be accompanied by the EU mental health strategy. And this is nothing new. Many stakeholders, including Gamian present in this room, Mental Health Europe, the European Parliament, have been calling for this strategy, which should be well-resourced, which should have concrete timelines and the budget. And we see this strategy as really kind of focusing on psychosocial aspects more of mental health. Then we call for a creation of a European mental health innovation hub that would be this place for coordination, for maybe a one-stop shop for scientific advice, for regulatory advice. And we also would like to see a European mental health care capacity initiative. Just as we talked today, the European Parliament is today discussing the crisis in the healthcare workforce. We know that every third healthcare professional is affected by either depression or anxiety, 5 times more than the general population. But anyway, we need to really upskill and empower healthcare professions and also provide, training, expand infrastructure, and so on. And finally, our paper is narrowing on psychedelic innovation as this test case for Europeans' competitiveness and innovation agenda. And as such, we look at the current challenges that are hindering psychedelic innovation in Europe and what could be done. And we think that the best instrument that could be used to address some of the challenges will be through regulatory sandboxes. And we'll hear in a moment from my colleague Francisca more about what such sandboxes could entail. This is a mind map of how we conceptualize the moonshot. Of course, it's quite small, but we will be sharing with everyone the kind of a proper file. So here we are kind of, it's our starting vision, connecting different dots and showing how these strands of policy can come together into one coordinated framework. And I want to finish by this reflection, which was inspired by a friend of PAREA present in this room, which is basically recognizing that Europe builds its competitiveness by investing in strategic infrastructure, energy, semiconductors, AI, and we should treat mental health exactly the same way as a critical infrastructure that unlocks human potential, that fuels economic growth. And we recognize that we'll be only able to scale and implement and deploy psychedelic therapies if you recognize mental health as this key driver of value in healthcare and society. So it is our call to place mental health at the center of all these EU's agendas, innovation, social agenda, competitiveness, so that it can become a success story where well-being powers economy and societal progress. Thank you.
Checking it's still on, I think so. Okay, so Tadeusz has explained the need for innovation in psychiatry and mental health. Well, this comes hand in hand with regulatory innovation. And in fact, as background information, the EU pharmaceutical legislation package is actually currently being overhauled. And in it, there is going to be a novel tool to be introduced called regulatory sandboxes. Regulatory sandboxes are conceptualized as a time-limited, regulated framework that would allow the testing of novel treatments or approaches that are maybe unsuitable to conventional regulatory routes in a more real-world regulated environment. So the provision is still being finalized, but the idea is that sandboxes would be something proposed by developers, overseen at a central level by the European Medicines Agency, and executed by individual national competent authorities in individual countries. So sandboxes as a concept are not completely novel. They exist in other fields like business and economics. There have been a couple of examples in healthcare, but usually at a smaller scale national level, for example, to pilot new digital tools in specific clinics. So in this iteration at a European medicines regulation level, it's a very novel concept, and it opens a big window of opportunity to address areas of urgent needs like has been presented in the previous slides. So this is a direct excerpt on regulatory sandboxes from the pharma regulation proposal, a recent version. I won't read you the whole thing, but some highlighted parts. A sandbox would be established if a product's unique characteristics make following existing rules impossible, and if its characteristics distinctly improve quality, safety, efficacy of patient access. They should be initiated when a gap is identified at an early stage between innovative science and technology and existing mechanisms of regulation, and they would allow the testing of innovative products in a real-world environment under strict regulatory conditions. We think these features make sandboxes fitting to mental health innovation, namely psychedelic therapies. And some reasons why are that we know psychedelics inherently impose some challenges for traditional drug development and clinical trials. One important example is the difficulties in defining and evaluating a combined intervention composed of a drug and a non-pharmacological therapeutic component, wherein regulatory bodies are focusing on new medicines. These factors can also create significant questions and barriers at the level of health technology assessment when decisions regarding reimbursement of new treatments are made by comparing new treatments to existing ones. We think these are areas where real-world evidence could really help complement clinical trial data, which is of course crucial to determine safety and efficacy, but it might be unsuitable to answer some other kinds of knowledge gaps. Also, the possibility of gradually incorporating these treatments in specific clinics and hospitals could contribute to preparing healthcare systems for their wider delivery later after marketing authorizations have been granted. And by this, I mean, because these treatments represent a different paradigm in psychiatry, there would be the need to allocate the necessary infrastructure and personnel, ensuring the experience, competencies, and dedicated training of this personnel, and also contribute to overall awareness and knowledge around these new treatments. In a study of mental health providers in the US, the preparedness of health systems and professionals was found to be actually one of the main barriers to integration of psychedelic therapies down the line. And interestingly, providers who are already delivering ketamine or esketamine treatments reported being more willing and ready to incorporate psychedelic therapy into their practice, which illustrates the importance of these factors and also the value of a system that allows a more gradual rollout, and perhaps also of ketamine as an interesting transition model here. Lastly, and very importantly, sandboxes could enable early access to therapies with scientifically backed therapeutic promise, arguably some of the most promising new treatments in psychiatry of the past decades, to people with no other suitable treatment options in a legal, safe, and regulated manner, instead of them having to wait a long time for phase 3 trials to be completed and for implementation to occur, which takes a long time in the EU and also different amounts of time in different countries, entailing important inequities as well. With this background, we came up with 2 possible use cases for future regulatory sandboxes for psychedelics, still under development, and these ideas are going to be very valuably informed by the presentations we will hear just following this. So I won't be getting into too much detail, but the first idea would be ketamine for depression. Ketamine is already an approved anesthetic. It has known antidepressive effects, and as such, it's been used off-label in psychiatry in many European countries, but practices vary largely. A sandbox here could maybe help establish EU-level consensus standards and guidelines for its use in combination with psychotherapeutic interventions. The second idea is psilocybin in end of life. This is a population with particular challenges and needs, and where there aren't any tools available to help with existential distress and psychological symptoms that come with having a life-threatening or a life-limiting condition. Theoretically, there are legal mechanisms here allowing the use of not yet approved treatments in these populations. This is known as compassionate use, but they differ from country to country. And the only example so far in the EU of something like this in psychiatry and psychedelics is in Germany very recently, as of August 2025, actually. But a sandbox here could maybe help operationalize these mechanisms with coordinated use standards, as well as integrate them with existing palliative care delivery pathways at national levels. And this could also help build upon knowledge of the first EU-funded trial of psychedelics, SciPal, which is looking at psilocybin therapy for psychological distress in a palliative care context. Our next steps for this initiative would be to formally set up a network of multidisciplinary experts to collaborate and further develop these ideas. We also will directly involve the European Medicines Agency. We are planning to submit a formal meeting request to the EMA Innovation Task Force, which is a regulatory platform dedicated to supporting the development of innovative treatments and approaches. And ultimately, we want to co-develop a set of recommendations or a concrete plan, as well as align all the necessary players towards a regulatory sandbox pilot for psychedelic therapy. Our event today marks not just the launch of our policy paper, but also of this project. And it's an opportunity to hear from people with expertise in these regulatory and clinical areas to shape our thinking around possibilities for regulatory sandboxes. I'm very much looking forward to some enriching discussions. I hope you are as well. And yes, with this, we'll pass the floor to our moderator and our presenters.
Thank you very much, Francisca, and thank you very much, Tad, for putting us in orbit in this discussion. Obviously, there will be opportunities for questions and comments later in the moderated discussion. The idea here is to fill you with information Please, as I said, if you have any comments, any thoughts, any ideas, put them down on paper, and we'll happily come back to these later on. Because I'd like to move on with our next speaker, and a long-standing friend in the brain community, Florence Butelaine-Ducoin, who was formerly at the EMA in charge of innovation in psychiatry, because Florence, you're a clinical psychiatrist by background with strong interest and focus in neuroscience. But currently, or recently, you moved to Gustave Roussy, so one of Europe's leading hospital dealing with cancer care. And you're going to provide us with a deeper dive in the challenges and opportunities. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What shall I do with the slide? Nothing? Someone is controlling? Yes. Yes, thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation. So yes, indeed. So I used to be at EMA for some years. And now I'm back to the clinical activity. So in one the teaching hospital from Saclay University, which is Gustave Roussy, a cancer research and clinical institute close to Paris, and also part of my previous research unit. Yeah, so it has been outlined already that, yes, indeed, there is a huge need to make the field moving forward, because as we know, we are still using the same drugs as when we were interns, and that would not be acceptable for any other specialty. And as also the previous speakers have highlighted, I mean, it's clear that there are a lot of people who are waiting for better treatment, safer treatment, and hopefully more personalized treatments as well. So I'm not going to go into details, but what I would like to present briefly is which are the usual challenges, because that's what also I was doing back at the EMA, trying to understand a bit better, you know, how we could help and what were the main issues based on what we know from the applications that have been submitted, reviewed. And what are the opportunities? I think Francesca mentioned the regulatory sandboxes, and try to see how this could help to meet the needs. So that's been already said. So very briefly, I mean, I put the reference here, but I think it's important to say that at EMA back then, we were a few people to really obviously try to understand better where the main problems were. Because with so few new products and even fewer innovation, I mean, something obviously has to be better understood and better done to help the field. So this is a piece of work that we did with few colleagues back then there. And what was quite interesting is that the population, the selection of the population, target population, is a very important challenge. And I think it's also something to consider when we think of psychedelics, because I think for psychedelics, it's also about defining the right population. And it's not that, that easily done. Of course, there are also points like effect size, the consistency of results, and the placebo effect. Placebo effect is a very big issue in psychiatry. I mean, in CNS in general, also in other specialties like in neurology, they have to face, and in every specialty, I must say, there is a placebo effect or response, depends how we want to name it. But this is something also that we looked at with colleagues from ICTM and with some European experts, because it's something that we want really to better understand. So it's not that nothing has been done to try to better address those issues, but there are complex issues, and it's true that with the current tools that we are having, it's not very easy to move forward. We've seen our little innovations there is in psychiatry, and it has not been really successful. Very few products. It's really striking compared to other specialties like cancer. The gap is enormous. But when the psychedelics arrived, it was in that context. I mean, the renaissance of the psychedelics, I think it came at a very particular moment somehow after the pandemic, when maybe people were again, more aware of the importance of mental health. It can seem a bit funny to say that, but it's true that the pandemic somehow put a light on the importance of being well, also mentally speaking. And psychedelics came to the attention of the European institution and EMA among them. So this is what we try to do over the past few years with colleagues from EMA and the network, and Francesca, my previous colleague, also was involved in that. And I speak under the control of Katarina, my previous colleague, and I know the work is still continuing and interest is still there, obviously, at EMA. But it's really an important matter, and it was considered as something that really needed to be think through and looked at in a scientific manner, like objective manner as much as possible, as for any other drug development. So sorry, the slide is not very well, I don't know why it came like that. Anyway, so with psychedelics, what the problem somehow are, we don't know everything about psychedelics yet. The research still needs to provide us with lots of information, of course. So, and it has importance in terms of drug development because it's about the dose finding, it's about understanding the effect of that drug, whether or not it needs to go through very important and huge effects that may be considered as a safety problem on one hand, or if we really we could get, you know, like treatments without any major safety problems, and the subjective effects would be really just enough to have an efficacy. So this is something that the research obviously is still ongoing. We have a number of hypotheses and ideas, but it's not crystal clear yet. And of course, it makes the drug development and the assessment more difficult because it as for other drugs in psychiatry, we don't know exactly how they work. So that's one of the problems. And with psychedelics, about this identifying the right population, I think, again, it's something that has its own importance because we know that the patients in psychiatry, they are polymedicated in most of the cases, and it needs to be better understood if those psychedelics will be on top of the existing treatment, or if there are treatments that can be kept and maybe not all of them, and how will we discontinue those treatments. So those are questions of importance when you want to run a trial, when you want to have the right population and make sure that at least your trial is designed in a way that if the treatment works, and you will be able to show an efficacy. What is currently advised, and you know that, is that it's also in the guideline for EMA guideline, which has been revised on depression. And there is a section on psychedelics, is to have a stepwise approach, to start with the most severe patients and then move on, to maybe a different population. But that's currently the thinking. There is something of importance as well, which is the placebo here. So we heard the placebo is important anyway, because as long as you give something to someone, or even when the patient takes his first appointment with the doctor, something is happening. So is it already a placebo response? But there is already an effect. I mean, it's already a step towards, a recovery. So obviously for psychedelics, the placebo is even more somehow of an issue or a challenge because patients and doctors know immediately if they are under psychedelics or not. So this raises a number of questions, whether or not the standards are really fit to show anything with those new drugs. This is something that also goes with the idea of trying to find new ways of development and regulatory tools as sandboxes could maybe offer. So the question with psychedelics is also the psychotherapy or the psychological element that is associated to the substance. So is it the substance plus the psychotherapeutic element, or is it the psychotherapy assisted by a substance? Anyway, it complexified somehow the research programs because it's important to understand how this combination of drug and intervention work if we want to set up the right trial and if we want to show an efficacy of both or just one in context trial design. So it's something that obviously the system right now has not really foreseen, or it needs to be discussed. And I think the good point is that we are all learning. It's kind of early days. So it's good to take all opportunities possible to try to move on and overcome those problems. So digital tools in clinical trial for psychedelics are also obviously an option to be considered, and probably something that could be also considered in sandboxes or any future tools that could help. There is an aspect which is not specific to psychedelics, but it's more related to what happened after the drug has been approved, and that's the world, of HTA bodies, price and reimbursement. But when it comes to psychedelics, there is also this element of training, of feasibility, because the national healthcare systems need to be able to provide the right setting to deliver those substances in a safe manner. So this is a slide that I was kind of used to present back when I was at EMA, but it's completely applies for psychedelics, because what is meant here is that psychedelics will be somehow considered as any other drug. So there is no prejudice per se against psychedelics. I think I can safely say that. I mean, over all those years I've spent at EMA, I've really seen more like an interest to know what that could do, in which population, how we can ensure safety if efficacy has been shown. So they will follow this route, of the usual route of the regulatory assessment. And when it comes to safety, we have a number of tools in place and at European level to ensure that the risks are minimized. So it's not new. I mean, think of cancer drugs, are very toxic drugs. But they are authorized, of course, and why? Because they're effective, and you know how to balance the risk as much as possible for your patients. So it's something that is manageable. Here I put something that is more to continue the discussion, but it's in the past, it's not really a psychotherapy per se, but we have had drugs in the past authorized at the level of EMA and in Europe with some type of non-pharmacological labeling, if you want. For example, Selincro, authorized quite a few years ago, of course, but you can see here it should be prescribed with continuous psychosocial support. So because it's obviously a very important element of the management of patients with alcohol use disorder, and then it needs to be reflected in the design of the trial. It needs to be integrated into the labeling. So it's feasible as well. I'm not saying that it's impossible to have it reflected in the labeling. It will be in some way, but it's new. And I don't think EMA has the answer, but no one has really the answer. So it's important to have a discussion, and whether it's innovative, a task force meeting, or any other platform to have this dialogue, I think it's important personally. So that's a guideline you can see as well, but it's an example of how it can be worded in a regulatory labeling. The point that the drug is not, only the main the vehicle of the treatment efficacy. Spravato, we talk about Spravato, that's a very busy slide, sorry for that, but that's a control access program for Spravato, because that's an example. We need to build up on examples because we haven't had so many new products. But Spravato, already 6 years ago, was introduced in Europe. not in every country to the same scale yet, but the program was discussed extensively, and there was an agreement at the time of approval, and it was implemented, and it's still on the market with no major issues in terms of safety. So it's working well. So again, it's feasible to do so. So what's next? Well, I mean, regulatory sandboxes, of course, it's exciting because it's a new opportunity, and I think we have to try to use them as much as possible to.
That's very good. I would put him.
Psychiatry is a good candidate. We understand why there is an unmet need, and the challenges are not that easily overcome by the actual setting in terms of regulatory, but also maybe scientifically wise. Psychedelics is a good candidate as well because it's new. It needs to be discussed among different stakeholders, and are promising data. So, and I think now being at the cancer world, if I can say, I think it's also a good candidate because it's a very fast-moving as well field, and there are many new needs in terms of treating the cancer patients because. And in a way, of course, now they were probably in a place, they are in a place now where we are hoping to go as well in psychiatry, because before patients had a poor overall survival. They were not united as they are now. And with a common effort and budget, they managed now to be in a place where they have many new treatments every year, very personalized, and they're not always safe, obviously. And we know as well that there are new problems happening with cancer patients now in terms of patients being treated with drugs that are inducing depressive symptoms, anxiety, and also because they live longer, which is good. Because they live longer, they have also new needs in terms of palliative care. So this slide is, I like it, it's very complex, but it means that there are many reasons why patients suffering from cancer may have also psychological or psychiatric condition. It's not only because of the condition itself, it's also because of the drugs, many factors, and it's going to increase because the cancer cases are increasing, also because of the population which is getting older in Europe. And I think it's a good case as well, since so many people are concerned, and it's a common disease, cancer, unfortunately, and it is changing because of the new products that are available and are creating somehow new needs, even for the oncologist colleagues who used to lose their patients from cancer, and now this become like a chronic disease with side effects, with a new way of approaching their life and the quality of life as well. So that's why I think it's building up on what has been done for SciPal could be a next step. But I'm a bit running over time, so I'm going to stop now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Florence. And this allows us to make another step in diving a little bit deeper into the conversation and now opening the presentations about our use cases. The first one being ketamine for depression. And I would like to welcome on stage Dr. Lowen Stewart. So Lowen, you are a specialist in emergency medicine and a fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians, but you come here in your quality as expert in the research on ketamine use. Your medical advisor in different hospitals, and Oxford Hospital in particular, and I'm sure you'll be talking about that. But very importantly, you co-founded the Norwegian Association for Psychedelic Science, and you're also an expert faculty on the American Society of Ketamine Physicians, and I'm really happy to hand over the floor to you.
Yeah. All right, so today I'm going to talk about the history of the development of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in Norway, and how this might inform implementation of other psychedelics on a European level. Both other speakers discussed the current need right now. Depression is the leading cause of global disability. About 30% of people don't respond to multiple standard medications. Right now, about 1 million people a year die by suicide. That's greater than the number of people who die in all wars and natural disasters combined. And yet, since the discovery of electroshock therapy about 100 years ago, no new treatment in psychiatry was as effective until ketamine. So ketamine is primarily an NMDA receptor antagonist, first synthesized in 1962 as an alternative to phenylcyclidine. It was approved by the FDA in 1970 and became one of the world's most widely used medications. It's on the WHO list of essential medications. It was labeled as a dissociative anesthetic because of this unique property of a sense of disconnection, detachment from the body, while with profound psychoactive psychedelic effects when used at a sub-anesthetic dose. The mechanisms, well, there's a lot of research being done into various mechanisms. The mechanisms that we know about based on research are quite similar to the mechanisms that we see with other classic psychedelic medications, including increased neuroplasticity, normalization of functional neural networks, and similar proposed psychological mechanisms from the subjective experience. Also, the treatment paradigm of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is very similar to that necessary for other psychedelic medicines. So there's a process of screening, there's preparation, the psychedelic experience with supervision, subsequent psychological integration. And it also requires the same physical infrastructure and also training of health professionals that is required for other psychedelic treatments. So briefly, the research that's been done on ketamine, it actually, the first use of ketamine in psychiatry was reported, publication in 1973, a group in Iran using focusing on the psychological transformative effects of the treatment. You know, this coincided with banning of psychedelic research and clinical use by the UN in 1970. Sort of separately, the biomedical approach was pioneered initially at Yale with the first RCT in 2000, showing a rapid antidepressant effect in the course of hours to days rather than weeks to months like traditional antidepressants. And research continued at the National Institute of Mental Health and many other places later. So there's been numerous randomized controlled trials with thousands of participants. There's a large effect size for treatment-resistant depression. It's rapid. The effects, the antidepressant effects, long outlive the presence of the medication in the body. And depending on the population, about 2/3 of people have a response and 1/3 have remission. But it took some time to get consensus about this practice. The American Psychiatric Association published a statement in 2017 supporting the use of generic ketamine for treatment-resistant depression. But there was, because of this lack of pharma funding for a generic medication, this took some time. There's been a number of other international consensus reports and national reports. Most recently, the UK Royal College of Psychiatrists supported its use based on adequate data and the large effect size. But again, in most places, ketamine use remains off-label and largely inaccessible. So the problem is that there's a global lack of access and infrastructure in order to implement this treatment. Because of this, we developed sorry, my notes of this. So the problem, one, because it's off-label, you have a lack of industry funding for new indication approval. It's generally not publicly reimbursed. And this is a new paradigm of treatment, which is very different than just prescribing an oral antidepressant to a patient that has a learning curve. So there's sporadic public availability, limited private availability, and a huge diversity of protocols and practice. So we developed a Norwegian strategy, which was one, to enable widespread access to this treatment now, and to build the psychedelic health system infrastructure throughout the country. So in 2017, I started lobbying stakeholders in the Norwegian health system to try to start a committee to try to start public access. That was met mostly with skepticism. So I started a private clinic to enable access to patients. And this was eventually supported by the medical board as a professionally sound practice based on evidence-based medicine. We started the first public ketamine unit, dedicated ketamine unit for the treatment of TRD in 2020, shifted it to an outpatient unit in 21, and up to date, we've treated about 500 patients in that unit, most with positive response and a good safety profile. In 22, we submitted a request for a health technology assessment because although we were providing the treatment for free in the public unit, there was no reimbursement for it. So the resources for that had to come from our psychiatry department, pulling from other areas. Simultaneously, we started what was called the Norwegian Network for Rapidly Acting Antidepressants. And this was an effort to communicate with and activate stakeholders in the health system, increasing knowledge and coming to consensus. So this was a network with representatives, leading psychiatrists from every major hospital in every health region in Norway, and having monthly meetings to discuss implementation. We published the review of our public unit in our medical journal, as well as making a public availability for the protocol that we were using at our ketamine unit, which mandated concurrent psychotherapy in order to get into the program. We also came up with an idea that in order to actually implement the treatment, we decided to apply for public funding for an RCT, a multi-site RCT, which would include the 10 major hospitals in the country, in all health regions. And we got public funding for this. We're starting recruitment in the beginning of this next year. And what this does is it allowed us to, a couple of weeks ago, we did the training for all the hospitals. So this allowed us to do the training, build the infrastructure for, one, the RCT, which has independent scientific value. But two, then there would be a ketamine unit, a trained ketamine unit in every major hospital in the country, and they could do clinical treatment. In June of this year, we got the report from the Medicines Agency, the Health Technology Assessment, which said that their assessment was that ketamine was non-inferior to ECT, the gold standard, about half the cost, it's preferred by patients, and it has a good safety profile. So in August of this year, the Health Directorate approved the use of off-label racemic ketamine for treatment-resistant depression, essentially immediately giving us nationwide implementation. The important part of this is that it was reimbursement for the treatment. The drug is dirt cheap. It costs a couple euros per treatment, but it was the treatment process that was packaged in that will be reimbursed by the health system. Another important thing to note is that Norway, like many other European countries, has not opted to reimburse Bravado based on health economic analysis. And after multiple attempts by Janssen to get reimbursement, they have not, but we pay for the cheap version in Norway. The criteria for this approval are, one, that all patients need to either be in a clinical trial or that their data is put in a data registry, and that this reimbursement decision will be reevaluated in 2028 based on the effects. So I believe that our experience with ketamine can be very useful as a model for the rollout of other psychedelic medicines in Europe. The other psychedelics are coming, and we need to be prepared. We can use ketamine as to fill this gap between the huge current need of patients right now and the long, costly regulatory pathway. We can also build the physical infrastructure and importantly, the human resource infrastructure that's necessary with these types of medicines, and do it in a way that ensures public universal access to patients. So it's not just available in private care or at very specific locations. Also, I think the data registries are critically important, that we can align both safety and outcome data. We can develop national, regional clinical guidelines for suggested best practices and continue to learn from the experiences that we have. And while we're actually treating people, continue to explore clinical and research knowledge gaps in this field using an already approved medicine that has a 50-year safety track record in a regulated framework. So in summary, I think this type of solution can lay the groundwork for success for the rollout of other psychedelic treatments in Europe. And we can continue to help the people that need it the most right now. This is a picture from my bedroom window just a couple days ago in Oslo. So that's the Big Dipper there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lowen. And I'd like now to welcome on stage Dr. Albino Oliveira Maya from the Champalino Foundation. So Albino, you are the director of the neuropsychiatry unit, And in that capacity, you oversee the activities of the foundation in the care for patients with cancer, particularly when it comes to their mental health. But you also deal with the treatment of resistant depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, and transcranial magnetic stimulation. But you're here in your capacity of the site director for the SciPal project, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. These are my disclosures. I've participated in several industry-sponsored research for esketamine and for psilocybin, but I guess an important conflict of interest that I only realized when I got here this morning is that I'm the vice president of the Portuguese Brain Council. So there you go. I work at the Champalamo Foundation, and I'm terrible at keeping time. So I try to do my thank yous before I start. So these are the people I work with. This is a unit that is both clinical and research driven. And it's sort of separated out so that I don't get too many issues with head counts at the end of the year. But it functions as a single team. And I've singled out some of the names of the people that have most contributed to some of the things that we're going to discuss here today. So we're going to talk about end-of-life care. I'm going to focus a little bit on depression specifically, although I'm not convinced that that's the only thing that we should be discussing here today. When we get to the end, I'll expand a little bit more on that. And I was very nicely introduced by our first speaker about the needs, the mental health needs of patients with cancer and the impact of depression that has been very well studied on quality of life, but also on cancer prognosis and survival rates. So there's no very clear definition of causality here, but there's a clear association with the presence of depression and lower survival of patients with cancer. So the needs are for early detection and effective intervention. So we've worked very actively in a couple of European projects on early detection. We worked on a large peripheral European project. I say peripheral because it was Finland, Portugal, a few other countries far away from Brussels that were studying the issues with regards to psychological process that is predictive of the development of distress in women with a first diagnosis of breast cancer. And we've also, oh, I'm sorry, and there was another image here that we lost, but there's another project that we've worked on, not so much in terms of psychological predictors, but in terms of the use of at-home gadgets to identify, for example, movement, and how that could be predictive of the presence of psychological distress and depression. Treatment is also a clear issue. So there's lots of research on the use of psychotherapy to treat depression in patients with cancer. We have an ongoing network meta-analysis that we're conducting on this. And the problem is that every time we go back to seeing what has happened, there's been lots of other new papers that have been published. So there's lots of evidence. And I see that there has been an issue with my slides. But, oh, no, there it is. But with regards to medication and the specific evidence of the impact of medication to treat depression, conventional medication to treat depression in patients with cancer, there's not that much evidence, and not all of it is particularly exciting with regards to efficacy when comparing the effects in active arms with the effects in placebo arms of these RCTs for treatment of depression in patients with cancer. So the opportunities for novel treatments in depression for patients with cancer are actually many of the opportunities that exist in other patients that have depression and don't have cancer. So we need treatments that have enhanced efficacy, treatments that are better tolerated, and very critically in cancer, we need treatments that are faster because we're dealing with patients that in many circumstances have a limited time on their lives. So we want them to get better as fast as possible, and we want to have treatments that are durable. This is an important psychological element in patients with cancer, which is they will avoid doing things that they don't think are fundamental for survival because they're always concerned about how they will interact or have unexpected effects in terms of their disease and in terms of their treatments. Psilocybin is one such opportunity. So it's a 5-HT2A, so a serotonin type 2A receptor agonist. And it's been under the radar for researchers and clinicians interested in the treatment of depression and in the care for psychological distress in patients with cancer for quite a while now. I would actually argue that it was the basis for what we currently call the psychedelic renaissance. So in this 2011 paper by Groh et al., there was a very small paper with just a handful of patients, or a couple of handful of patients, with a signal for an impact of psilocybin, both on symptoms of depression and of symptoms of anxiety. So we can construct this globally as an impact on distress. And then in 2016, two back-to-back papers by Ross et al. And Griffiths et al. These were published in the same number of the same journal, and basically reporting very, very similar findings in patients with advanced cancers, many of them in terminal condition, where a lot of the issues that I touched on previously as needs seem to be addressed. So what we see, this is a good example. So in a comparison between an active placebo arm and the psilocybin arm, we see an incredible distinction, a huge difference, so very significant efficacy. We see that this is very fast. So these effects are being assessed one day after the administration of the psilocybin. And the other thing that is very critical, both for symptoms of depression and for symptoms of anxiety, is that these effects seem to be long-lasting after only 1 or 2 administrations of the substance. So it almost seems like a wonder drug from these studies, right? So it's fast, the efficacy is huge, and it lasts for a long time. And essentially the same things were observed for Griffiths et al. And take note that what we're looking here is not symptom reduction, is the percentage of individuals that reach remission, right? It's our primary target. And we have numbers of 80% in one study and 60 to 70% in the other study. So this is essentially unheard of. So these studies led to incredible enthusiasm, right? And that enthusiasm very, very rapidly drifted away from cancer. And part of that was for regulatory reasons, because people were thinking that it's going to be very hard to regulate things in this population with a diagnosis that is not always entirely clear. And also because the amount of individuals that are in need of new solutions are greater when we get outside of cancer. And so studies very rapidly started to be done in patients that had depression but did not have cancer or other disorders. But the results were not as exciting. So this is a study in not necessarily resistant depression comparing a conventional antidepressant with psilocybin. And there's a numerically larger effect for psilocybin, but it was not statistically significantly different from a conventional antidepressant. And this is the COMPASS study that we were involved in, studying 3 different doses of psilocybin and showing a particular effect for the largest dose. But take note that the percentage of individuals that remit at week 3 is 1/3. So it's not 80%, it's 30%. And take note of another thing, which is 1/3 of those that remit by week 12 have recurred. So they're again sick. So it's a great treatment, but it seemed better in the initial studies in patients with cancer. So why is that, right? So one idea is, well, the initial researchers were very excited. The initial research participants were very excited, so you had better results, right? Another interpretation is, well, these patients are special patients, that depression in patients with cancer is not the same thing as depression when you are seeing patients that don't have cancer. Maybe in that circumstance, the experience, the psychedelic experience, has specific and deeper meaning. Maybe the psychotherapy was done differently or contributed to accentuate that meaning. And then there's another element that's a complicated element because it's an eternal creator of ambivalence in this field, which is, should we use a diagnostic approach where we're treating people that have cancer and a major depressive episode? Or should we use a symptomatic approach where we're essentially concerned with depression as a symptom, the same way that we are concerned with insomnia as a symptom, the same way that we are concerned with pain as a symptom, rather than looking at depression as a diagnosis? Oh, I'm sorry. So this didn't really survive. My apologies. You're going to need to believe me that there has been some research, very, very limited research that has been done in the years to follow. A paper published, two papers published in 2023, very small numbers of patients. But again, I'm glad I put some text there. So the evidence in these small trials is of very significant numbers, similar to the original research. So it might be early researcher enthusiasm, but that enthusiasm has survived, has continued. Is it a symptomatic approach? That's possible, right? So these studies, at least one of them, it included something, it's buried in the methods, but it's very clear. It's not only major depressive episode, it's also adjustment disorder with depressive symptoms. So more of a symptomatic approach than a diagnostic approach. And about the meaningful experience, again, I had a really beautiful image here. So one of these studies clearly showing an association between the score in the MEQ questionnaire and the effect down the line. So supporting something that has not been consistently supported in depression outside of cancer, that the nature of the experience during the psychedelic experience could be a predictor of the therapeutic response down the line. And this is a case that I think illustrates this nicely. I got it out of the general press in The Guardian of a patient that was going through a tough mental health experience in the context of stage 4 colon cancer. It was not only the cancer, it was the cancer, people around him dying from cancer. So this sense of impending doom and of finitude and end, right? And he comes across the 2016 data, connects with a provider that allows him to receive legal access to psilocybin. And I wanted to underline this last statement of what he says, of what this patient mentioned. It gave me a taste of what life after life could be. Instead of the idea that the lights shut off, the party's over, it was like a transition from one state to another. And that was really comforting to me. And I think we can all imagine, if we put ourselves in this position, how comforting this could be. And indeed, there's been academic research, not only at a biological level, but more at a philosophical and neurophilosophical level, with regards to how psychedelics could address the fear of death. And some views are that they may promote non-physicalist metaphysical beliefs, persuading participants of the falsity of a broadly naturalistic worldview. And this is interesting, but at the same time dangerous, right? And it's dangerous from a procedural perspective, first of all, right? So this is a hard thing to sustain from trials into real life, right? So we need to have a very clear concern about procedure, right? And psychotherapy might be a critical element in that procedure. It needs to be seen as an instrument for efficacy, and we need to report it properly so that it can transfer from trials into real life and into implementation. And then we need to be careful that there are many other research procedures that can contribute to efficacy without us knowing. Right? For example, just informed consent. Informed consent could be critical when beliefs are such a fundamental element of the efficacy. And again, we also need to think about this very carefully from an ethical perspective, because we're treading a very, very fine line. So I would say we need more and we need better research. SciPal, I believe, is a good example of more and better research where we're addressing this not in patients with cancer, but in patients with end-of-life treatment for several disorders. At the Champalimau with Carolina and Marcelo, we're dealing with advanced Parkinson's disease and atypical Parkinsonian disorders. But we really want to address this in cancer. I think cancer is a very specific and special psychological circumstance that we need to address more and for which we need to get funding. So I want to thank our funders. I want to thank our collaborators. In SciPal, this is a huge array of collaborators, but I want to specifically thank the University of Groningen, where we have the PI for the project, Robert Shovers, our other clinical PIs, and some of the people in the room. I now realize that there were additional people in the room from SciPal that I should have acknowledged. So thank you very much, and I hope this was useful.
Thank you very much, Albino. And this is closing the first part of our meeting today, where you are receiving information, and now you will be put to work and invited to comment. And it is my pleasure and privilege to hand over to PAREA's chair, Professor David Nutt, who will be moderating this next session. David, over to you.
Thanks, Fred. Can you all hear me without the microphone?
Yes.
The online people need the microphone. Okay, I'm going to do it sitting down. I still got a broken ankle and I'm limping. So that was an impressive hour and so of information. I've got quite a lot of questions and thoughts, which I will share with you in a minute. But first, I want the audience here to ask any questions they want to ask. And we're going to take notes. And when you do ask a question, you'll obviously need the microphone because the people on the line won't hear you. Say who you are, because we want, obviously, to come back to you with answers to your questions at some point. They won't necessarily be answered today. So who in the audience has questions? There you go.
And I would also maybe like to invite the speakers to take the seats for the panel. Yeah. you don't need to be alone up here.
And just to say that we will be also taking the questions from the audience. So thank you already for the questions that you shared.
Thanks so much to all the speakers. My name's Claire MacDonald. I've just finished some research at King's College looking at the regulatory barriers to the psychotherapy element of these treatments. But I'm also a consultant working with the UK Commission. It's called the Fielding Commission, looking at the legislation of psychedelic therapies in the UK. I'm the theme lead for the data registry that the UK needs to devise, develop, house, implement. So I'd just love to hear from Loan in terms of the registry piece you mentioned in Norway, just some insights on how that came to be, how it's used, what data goes into it, and how you see that collaborating on a broader scale than just in Norway.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I can't really answer it right now because we're in the process of developing the national registry. So currently, all the units that have been trained and have started clinical treatment have local registries. We're in the process of coordinating together so that we have the same psychometrics, the same safety outcomes. We're also putting together a national biobank so that we'll have blood samples from patients. We have sort of a broad consent program already in place in Norway. One of the models we've looked at is Norway already has a national ECT register. So this is a national database for patients with treatment-resistant depression who are undergoing ECT. And so obviously it's the same patient population. It's pretty easy for us to look at that model. There may be some differences. There certainly are differences between ketamine and ECT. But we're
Nein,
really
ich
excited
gehe
about
gleich.
making a
Würden Sie mir
national
die Rechnung
register.
per E-Mail zusenden, bitte?
And we're really excited in collaborating with other European nations on a collaborative European level register that has shared data.
Yeah, thanks, Lo. And I want to add two things to the. We've already invited the Germans and the Dutch or the SIPAL group to link with the Australian registry. So that's already started because obviously they've got several hundred people having MDMA and psilocybin therapy there, and it would be really good if there was some harmonization of data collection, at least a minimum data set. And I was going to invite you, Loan, to join as well. And at some point, after this, I'll put you in touch with the group in Canberra who are leading the Australian data collection. But I think the other point to make, and this is, I think, hugely important in the UK as well, and probably in many other countries, but I don't know how many do have national ECT registers. Because if you do, it's very easy just to just piggyback on that. And I mean, my ambition, by the way, I just have to share my prejudice. I started off researching substitutes for ECT in my thesis in 1979. I am very old, and it will be wonderful if ECT could disappear in my lifetime to be replaced with something like ketamine or psychedelics. That's just a little bit of my personal prejudice there. Right. We're going to take a question from online now.
Yeah, so I have a few questions here from the online audience. I'm sorry, I will be not attributing names, and I took the liberty of shortening them a bit because sometimes they are a bit longer. So there are two questions that I thought maybe we can treat together. One is basically mentioning that the majority, 98% of the psychedelic use is happening outside of the clinical model. And the question is if the public health efforts should move beyond the clinical model to make psychedelic use safer and more accessible, given also that there are high costs of developing these treatments, low regulation. So would decriminalization and communities access better serve equity and public health goals? And the other question is also speaking about most of the psychedelic use happening underground and that might continue despite legal restrictions. Increasing the risks. So with clinical models, as the clinical models advance, who will ensure public education on harm reduction and safety, especially in non-English speaking parts of Europe? Who will fill this knowledge gap?
Well, the good news is I'm rewriting Drugs Without the Hot Air. The third edition is in the process of being rewritten and will come out at the end of next year. So that's sorted. All we need is translation into other languages.
I actually, read it the moment it was out, maybe 10 years ago. So it was 15. Yeah, it was very, very informative. I mean, maybe on these questions, I think, it doesn't have to be a false dichotomy. Maybe in the future, there could be some kind of a system where we have a triage, but I don't see how people who are affected, by serious mental health conditions go somewhere outside of the purview of healthcare and people with expertise.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know if anyone wants to comment, but it's pretty obvious that a lot of people are going underground because that's the only place they can go. But there are also obviously quite interesting models, which I think we will discuss in our documents and also as we progress the sandbox. I mean, you've got the Oregon model, which is essentially a well-being with mushroom model, and that's a hugely important advance, both in terms of generating safety data and also potentially to generating data on population well-being and resilience. And we've got the Dutch, haven't we? I mean, I'm slightly surprised that our Dutch colleagues haven't already raised their hands. You know, you got the truffles, and a lot of people are buying their truffles and going to therapists in the Netherlands, and that could easily be rolled out in a sensible way. What we need in Holland is to collect data from those people if it's possible, and then maybe you can put your mind to that. Okay, question at the back there.
Yeah, like a question and a statement.
Who are you?
My name is Jakub. I represent here Institute for Rational Addiction Policies from Czech Republic. One thing, when it comes to Netherlands, that's a still gray area as far as I remember, because like a lot of retreats are organized outside of like an organized healthcare system, and it's kind of a little bit dodgy. But when we are talking about something that is more systematic and organized, earlier this year, Czech Republic acknowledged actually the psilocybin in psychiatric treatment. So maybe you're looking for the models because the companies and something is already starting to happen over there.
We're really interested in the Czech model. Do you have any further information? Is that how it might
yeah,
roll?
I happen to be directly connected with people who lobbied for the regulation, and also I'm working directly with people who are working on that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting what could happen. Do you know if it definitely will?
Like generally the the legislation has been already passed by the parliament back in June.
Yep.
So it's already written in law. And right now the first companies and first retreats are starting up. Like I believe there's like 5 or 6 companies that are working already in Czech Republic with actual psychiatrists and psychologists that are doing something. Maybe there's even more, but that's according to the state of my knowledge.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you, David. I'm Henrik Jung-Aberle, representing Mind Foundation, a German nonprofit, and the Ovid Clinic Berlin. So my friend and colleague Gerd Gründer has been pivotal in bringing compassionate use to Germany. It's a very restricted model at the moment. So what do you think do we have to do to make this kick-off shot for a European movement? Who do we have to bring together?
Well, thanks. That's one of the questions I have in my long list of questions in this morning, and it's focused at the EMA. I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, Ms. EMA over there, but it seems to me the EMA concept of compassionate use is kind of arbitrary. And I don't suppose you even know how it evolved or developed, or whether it's justified to be limited to things that are already in phase 2 or 3. So I don't know if you want to comment. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't see that necessarily that the regulations around compassionate use are definitely not set in stone. No regulations are, and maybe we should loosen them rather rapidly.
Yeah.
Well, let's find out. It's going to go in the sandbox for sure, but let's see what she says. So who are you? Remind me of your name.
So Katarina Vucic, EMA. So just a small comment regarding compassionate use from my side, and that is that the EMA is not a responsible body, but it is regulated at the national level. So the stakeholders are coming to the member states. Stakeholders are coming to the member states and are coming with their proposals for the compassionate use. Yes.
So there isn't any EMA directive on compassionate use. It's all individual. Are you saying that?
So it is not the EMA who regulates in the sense that authorizes.
Yes.
It is at the member states level.
Okay.
So I think this could be a beauty of sandboxes, because we have this, fragmentation where we don't have one Europe-wide mechanism for early access, but every country has completely different rules. And we can imagine, the future where we have 1 or 2 sandboxes in psychedelics, whereby we have a certain center of excellence, which have a methodology which is not coming from their national legislation, but something agreed at the European level, with the, of course, EMA's involvement. And then they do their kind of pragmatic studies, and then we have a harmonized collection of data where we can capture long-term outcomes, where you can capture, the refining dosing strategies, the patient selections, and many other domains where these data that can be then put together and complement the clinical trial and regular placebo-controlled data. So we hope that with sandboxes we could overcome this issue of every country doing their own thing.
Any more questions? Do you want to do another online one? Oh, there's someone here.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just wanted to comment, provide a little bit of context.
Just say who you are.
Sorry, I'm Joost Breeksema. I'm the director of the Open Foundation in the Netherlands. So just by way of context, truffles containing psilocybin are not illegal in the Netherlands. Whether licensed mental health care practitioners are allowed to apply it in a therapeutic context to patients is really a gray area. There have been no cases. There's no case law. The inspectorate, the Youth and Healthcare Inspectorate, is undecided on the issue, but it is definitely a risk for healthcare practitioners. If they apply, something goes wrong, they can lose their license very easily. But there is a broad context where psilocybin containing truffles are offered for non-medical purposes. And there is definitely underground use, but it's all very underground, and there is no clear relation between regulated use and unregulated use.
I mean, just one other point to make for those of you who don't know. I mean, the Netherlands is a fantastic place where you can go and as a therapist and get experience, and that's what happens in the UK. There are organizations now which coordinate education in psychedelic therapy and then arrange trips to Dutch retreats. And it's been working for quite a few years, and it's extremely effective. And yes, I think half of our team have been trained in the Netherlands in this indirect fashion.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we have recently set up like an extensive training program, a 2-year training program that includes experiential training using truffles, because it is legal to do so in the Netherlands. And we are collaborating with a Youth and Healthcare Inspectorate, with the professional associations, to do this as sanctioned as possible, which I think is really, really important. If I can move from the Netherlands to a more European level, I was wondering if you could comment, maybe for Francisca and Florence and Ted, just your perspectives on PRIME and how it relates to breakthrough status, and maybe if you can reflect a little bit on what the actual impact of getting breakthrough status has on the speed of approval, because you could see from Ted's slide, the MDMA was the first to receive the status almost a decade ago. Approval hasn't happened. Maybe that's independent of breakthrough status, but are there lessons that can be learned from a European regulatory perspective, and how can those be applied?
I was just going to very briefly say that the FDA breakthrough therapy designation and PRIME are parallel, but they don't exactly work in the same way. But then I was going to pass on to Florence, that has much more experience and knowledge of the PRIME scheme.
Yeah, thank you. They are often compared to one another, of course, because they are meant to speed up access to new drugs. In psychiatry, as we know, in Europe, of course, PRIME status, they are publicly known, once they are granted. So not everything is listed on the web. But it's true that, for psychiatry, it's not necessarily an easy path, because among the criteria, you have to show already, like promising data and according to certain requirements. So in a way, we are a bit back to the issue that psychiatry drugs are facing when it comes to show benefit risk within the current regulatory requirements that we are having in Europe. So it's true that it's maybe more difficult somehow for psychiatry products to be successful, and that's also why we have seen in the previous presentation how much companies are pulling out, and obviously that's not helping at all. So it's a vicious circle. And it's also why this paradigm shifts that the psychedelics somehow are bringing to the table is interesting, because it provides something that maybe helps to think a bit differently in terms of drug development in psychiatry, and hopefully, yes, bring new alternatives for the patients. But, that I cannot say, because as I've just said before, that PRIME in general, it's a bit different that breakthrough designation. Also, I must say that breakthrough designation, it's not FDA, which proactively, you know, communicates about the successful outcome of a breakthrough designation application. It's companies usually who, you know, obviously are very happy to share the news. So for PRIME, there is every year a list. EMEA is transparent about the PRIME status that have been granted. That doesn't say for sure what has been discussed and denied or stopped, but that gives already an idea, proxy, if you wish, of what is happening in every specialty, every therapeutic area, and again, psychiatry is behind it, true.
Yeah, so I'll just add, so again, first of all, breakthrough therapy is much more power than PRIME, offers much more, but it's not a guarantee for success. And we know that FDA has been changing signposts, and you know, they have a right to do so, the field evolves. Also, what's really important with PRIME is that how the unmet need is defined, and the way it is defined now in Europe, it's not really capturing mental health, quality of life, it's more capturing mortality and so on. So PAREA has issued a policy paper last year precisely recommending that we don't look just at narrowly at unmet medical needs, but we look at unmet public health needs, which also capture quality of life, which capture prevalence, you know, the burden on society. So just wanted to add that. And now, you know, these discussions are kind of being finalized as part of the pharma package. We also met with a number of health attaches from different countries trying to make this case. Now, I want to pass to a couple of extra questions from the audience. One will be to you, Albino. So a person quotes the patient mentioning, "It gave me a taste of what life after life could be. This moves into the spiritual space, which is my interest, through transpersonal psychology. Are there any discussions on how this could fit into a future clinical model?" And before you answer, I'll also pose a second question to Loan. So Loan, you can tackle it after Albino. The question is about ketamine therapy for TRD. What is the general feeling in Europe regarding efficacy of ketamine pharmacotherapy alone versus ketamine assisted therapy? So psychotherapeutic support, how is that implemented? So we start with Albino and then pass to Loan.
So thank you for the question. This is a tough domain, I believe, right? Because spiritual care is important. It should be available, but it's largely self-driven, right? So it's something that, and I mean, I live in a Southern European Catholic country, right? So we've moved out of the imposed spiritual care model, right? Where you would have people that would visit you irrespective of what you wanted or not wanted, because it was assumed that everyone had the same belief, right? So, and this is something that I think we need to respect. So I think it's very interesting to entertain the idea that there are spiritual components to the effects of these treatments in these populations, but at the same time, there's incredible risk associated to it. I would say, I think there's incredible ethical risk associated to it, because we need to be very careful if we're doing things that could be imposing beliefs that are not necessarily the beliefs that these individuals went into treatment with, and that might not be their objective starting off with. So I think it's hugely hopeful. I think it's incredibly interesting, but also it merits very careful thought and care.
And can I have a follow-up question? So have you heard of the concept of comforting delusions, which is also, you know, speaking to the point that some people might adopt certain religious beliefs, which will definitely make them feel better, or might, but, you know, kind of epistemologically might not be I mean, you know, there are all sorts of beliefs, and again, you brought up the ethical dimension, and I think, you know, this is something we should be also at least aware of, especially in maybe palliative care populations.
So at Mind Foundation, we're running the largest psychedelic therapy training in Europe. And one of the principles that we try to apply is ontological agnosticism. And I think that is a major, I believe at the moment, that's a major thing for professionalizing the whole community of psychedelic therapists. So not ignoring the psychedelic experiences of people, but never inducing or not even evoking or inviting it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, okay. So it's a really good question. I would say, you know, in the general field, over the last couple decades, I think there's a pretty wide consensus among practitioners of ketamine treatment, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, that the combination is better than ketamine pharmacotherapy alone. That being said, there's a huge lack of research on that topic. So it's mostly, you know, clinical experience, observational studies at this point. In terms of the thoughts in Europe, I would say most of the other, you know, in Norway, we chose to establish the baseline standard guideline to incorporate both psychological support during the experience, preparation, and integration afterwards, but also concurrent standard evidence-based psychotherapy conjunctive with the ketamine treatment as part of our national protocols. But I think in most other European countries I'm aware of, it's primarily being done, when it is done, it's a real biomedical pharmaceutical approach where just like, you know, you're sitting in a room with bright lights and here's a medicine, it might make you feel a little weird, and that's it. So, yeah.
If I can just add, so there was, I mean, Dave, you just released a really interesting paper on ketamine when you speak about harnessing this powerful psychoactive properties of ketamine and how the extra non-pharmacological and contextual factors can amplify this, just like with serotonergic psychedelics. So I think it's interesting to see this similarity. And also, I just very quickly, there was another paper, and I really like the way it formulated, you know, the kind of answering to the question that we had, and speaking about shifting perceptions of ketamine from being a panacea that is passively received toward being one important component of a multifaceted and active effort toward recovery. I think it's really capturing well kind of what this could be.
Yeah, I think there's a huge ethical challenge. I'll come into you, don't worry, unless you want to answer that question. Yeah, I think I mean, there are a number of really quite crucial decision points to be made over the next few years, but I think maybe one of the most important is it ethical to continue to give ketamine without therapy? And the reason I say that, I'll just share so last year I gave a talk at the sort of launch of this Italian psychedelic society. It was a load of psychiatrists, but also neuroscientists, and it was a very well attended University of Milan. And they beamed in an Italian psychiatrist from Mass General, and she told us about she was overseeing the enormous number. They'd done over 1,000 ketamine treatments at Mass General over the last 20 years using both racemic ketamine and esketamine. And she said, what's strange is that people aren't getting better, but they're coming back. And I said, well, that's probably because they're becoming dependent on the ketamine and you're not actually using it optimally. So there's a little, I don't think she was very amused by that statement. But I think it's true. I mean, I think the idea that you continue to give ketamine for life when you potentially could give it better Seems to me that's quite an important challenge. And it's also got health economic issues as well, hasn't it? I mean, because what Lowen has been doing and what we were doing in the UK is 3 or 4 sessions with effective therapy and often getting enduring benefits. So I think that's one of the issues we need to perhaps reflect a bit. And that I just want I do find it really weird that there's so much hostility to psychedelic therapy, even when you can, and the fears that have been generated about, well, we don't have enough data on long-term effects. Well, we don't need it because there aren't. The long-term effects are basically, our recovery. I mean, but the model, the continuous. I made a note. From what you were saying today that there mustn't. We mustn't assume that psychedelics have to comply with all the rules which have been generated over the last 50 years for drugs which are less effective and potentially more toxic. So we need to change the paradigm with which we assess these drugs, as well as their safety, as well as their efficacy. Over to you.
Thank you. Alessandra Martini, I work for the European Commission.
Can you get closer to the microphone?
Research and innovation sector. So I'm funder and policy maker on different portfolios. My question, I want to congratulate the presentations of the speaker, very informative in many aspects. Maybe a question for reflection, and if you have additional information on the aspects which are actually lately touched by some of the questions as well, about hesitancy, about acceptability of psychedelics, not only from the patient side, so whether you have studies or analysis done to that thematic at patient status, okay, but also on the funders, on the industry that the USA is pulling out, on the policymakers or governments that have to choose and decide on national level whether to implement certain policy and take certain routes, yes or no. So that was because we hear some experiences of a few countries, but more on the overall, I mean, especially for countries which are maybe more reluctant, if you have seen that, and what lesson is taken and can be brought there, or what activities can be done to lower if this is a barrier or a challenge in moving the field.
Can I just start? One of the common misperceptions is that because these drugs are illegal, you can't use them in medicine. Many countries use that. My country continues to argue that until the UN reschedules psilocybin, we shouldn't be using it as a medicine. And that prejudice, historic prejudice and ignorance is really pervasive. So that's one thing we can do education-wise, but I'll pass it over.
Well, I can give you our local experience, let's say. And I definitely, I've had a hard time understanding this mechanism, which has occurred for ages, right? Because we use morphine, we use amphetamines, there has been research, there has been implementation, but de facto, for quite a while, there was this gray cloud on top of psychedelics. And our experience in Portugal was that it has become less difficult. I would say right now it's very much at the standard level for any trial in terms of approving trials for occurrence, which was our first hurdle, right? So the COMPASS trial was a nightmare to get through. We had to go back and argue and discuss. Initially, we got a one-sentence denial saying this is not safe, full stop, end of statement. So it was a nightmare. The second one was difficult. This last one was, it was seamless. It was as easy as any other trial for any other conventional drug that we've tried. I do think from a different perspective of your question, which is not so much as into regulators and policymakers, but into patients, right? And people that are available. I think that's one of the issues for the history and the effects, right? So who were the patients that would accept to do this in 2010? Are they the same patients that will accept to participate in studies in 2025? I'm not sure. I think that's something that we need to be careful about. And I think it also says something about the model of implementation, right? When we're thinking about a medical model versus a wellness model, if we go for one of them and not for the other, we're going to restrict who's going to actually access the treatments, both for reasons of established equity mechanisms that exist for health but don't exist for other processes, but also because some patients do want to get their healthcare from where they get their healthcare for everything else, right? And I think we need to think about these people because I believe they are the majority.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I just want to comment on, I think it's a very important point, acceptability. And at a local level as well, we are going to start a study about this exact point of acceptability from the patient viewpoint, the carer, but also the healthcare professional, how feasible it is. Because down the road, if it's proven to be effective and can be safe, well, how is it going to be implemented at national level? And health economics will be also on the table because what's going to happen is, you know, we have options, but they're not satisfactory, but they are what they are. And if the member states want to invest in those drugs, it needs to bring something more. And for example, if I take the case of palliative care, and what we are trying to do now is with our palliative care fellow colleagues, is to understand what could be a good population. So good population, good candidate population is basically patients in palliative care setting, but at which stage, to do what, to show what, and also from the economic viewpoint, what do we want to prove? Which point do we want to make to our, you know, also policy maker and healthcare policy decider? For example, in palliative care, what we see is that patients tend to come back more often to A&E. They tend to have longer hospitalization if they have anxiety or depressed symptoms, and that has an immediate also impact on their families and on the professionals who are taking care of them. And all of that, of course, makes sense clinically, scientifically, but it's also a societal impact. So mental health care has an impact on societies, which is also an economical side. And it's important to, I think, to highlight what is expected from feasibility studies in this population and who is most likely going to be eligible for those therapies. So that's why also at a local level, we are going to start this type of study to better understand, what is the target.
But I just want one question that was in my mind all today is, could any country license a psychedelic for palliative care? There is no drug for palliative care. It's not a diagnosis. So one of the challenges in this we're going to have to face in the sandbox is how we deal with things that aren't diagnoses, but are clearly what doctors deal with. Okay, question at the back.
Yeah, hi, Philip Drexel, philanthropist, investor, and benefactor of psychedelic therapies. I'm assuming that innovators are going to innovate and that psychedelic molecules are going to develop from here on, and it's kind of like a platform that that we are getting used to, that psilocybin and LSD might be the compounds that we develop new drugs from. And now looking at how long these cycles take for legislation to really take place, especially now in the European Union, to what extent can we create a flexible framework to accommodate sort of the next wave of innovation in that space, and accommodate these sort of moonshots and make sure that that we're not opening up 6-hour windows of ayahuasca therapy while there's already molecules that treat way better in, I don't know, 8 years, to sort of warp speed the process of getting treatment to people that need it at that moment.
So maybe I think the innovation can lie both on the side of innovators and hopefully also regulators. In terms of innovators, we see that the next generations of psychedelics obviously are tweaked to have, first of all, a shorter onset of duration. That's a no-brainer, I suppose. But I would still, defend the usefulness of also compounds like LSD. I see the future where we are very we have a very individualized approach, and for some people, hopefully for many, shorter acting compounds, maybe with tweaked psychoactive properties, could work better. For some others, they would need much more time. People actually are saying often, patients, that they need more time to process things or need more treatment. So that's one innovation. And then on the side of regulators, well, it's a bit of a more difficult area, but again, sandboxes is one idea of how we can try to innovate in this space. Fred is showing me that someone there has a question, so.
Hi. We listened about this. My name is Chiara Coppola. I'm a freelance clinical psychologist and psychotherapist, and I'm also activist for psychedelic care in Europe. And well, I, as a psychotherapist, I mean, we all belong to very different kind of psychotherapy. So when I hear this psychotherapy, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, or this need to involve the psychotherapeutic model, I guess, I mean, I wonder which psychotherapy you talking about, because it's a very different, shades if you want to include a cognitive behavioral model or a transpersonal model, as the question that we received from home. And when all this started in the 60s, we had this kind of thing. And Stanislav Grof, it was a psychiatrist, but he was also a psychoanalyst. And then they came out with the transpersonal psychotherapy that was including them also. I always wonder why we just don't look a little bit back and take inspiration from what we already went through. And he collected so many studies about how to include all the transpersonal map of the psyche without being scared about it. Because I mean, otherwise there is always this risk to go too much into the rational and the physical and excluding completely the consciousness, which is actually what is working when it comes to psychedelic experiences. Because you were guys talking about the end of life crisis. So what is that is actually working with psychedelics? It's that experience that give a kind of sense. So it's more a comment than a question, actually. Yeah.
Comment on how you do that. So the first thing I would say, and thank you for your question, is that we don't know if your last statement is correct, right? We don't know if it's the experience. We think that it might be, right? We definitely need research to be able to address that meaningfully, but we don't know. And then I would say that from your original question, which is, so what is it when we say psychedelic assisted therapy? What de facto is the therapy? And I guess the right word you used is you wonder what it is, because in many circumstances it's not appropriately described. This is something that we have looked at, right? So you can always say, well, if you dig deep enough and you contact the people and you ask and you go to trainings, for sure, right? But the concern is what's going to happen when these things go from papers to actual implementation. At that level, the information needs to be complete, transparent, and available, right? It should not be based on knowing someone or having been at a meeting, or there needs to be some other process. And I don't think that process is appropriately in place. And maybe sandboxes could be an opportunity to put that in place. Right? Because we also don't have an appropriate mechanism at the European level to do this with the level of detail that is required, right? It's very different from saying that you need to have life support or one-to-one supervision. There's an incredibly enhanced level of complexity that you need to define, right? It's complex enough to define a whole profession, right? So there's more complexity. I don't think there's a process. There's not a European process. And I think in many local or national realities, it's also insufficiently defined. So your question is very important, but I don't think it has an answer.
And yeah, just a question online about so there's been this progress in Australia where psilocybin and DMA were rescheduled, and it occurred long before adequate infrastructure was in place. And what is Europe's learning from that experience? And as data gathering at Australia shows no signs of being broadly accessible, could this be improved in Europe? So I thought I would maybe bring in Francisca and Lowen, because I think there's something to learn both from the ketamine kind of providers' readiness that you spoke about.
But that question is not true. One of the conditions where the Australian TGA approved psilocybin MDMA was because at that time, 150 psychiatrists had gone through training in Australia. That was a fact, and that was one of the compelling arguments as to why it was allowed to be rolled out. In the same way as has happened in Norway, you've trained people, and therefore the government's confident you have a body of people who can actually provide the treatment.
Yeah, I mean, I can't comment so much on the Australian program. But I think the concern is important. We need to have the infrastructure in place. It's not solely just approving something. We need to have infrastructure, oversight, good training. Yeah.
Yeah, seconding that, and as I showed in my slides, I think this preparedness has definitely been identified as one of the main factors that needs to be focused on. And once more, regulatory sandboxes could be an opportunity for that, to really allow the real world experience with it. And I think it's important for that to happen alongside the clinical developments. So I mean, the clinical trials that are already happening, you need both of those things. You need the real world experience and preparedness as well.
We've got time for 2 quick questions because we must be
quick ones because we are
All right.
past time.
Okay, so I will have 2 questions, one for Dr. Nat, one for Francisca. Dr. Nat, do you think that when it comes to the whole skepticism, when it comes to psychedelics and other psychoactive substances, when it comes to treatment and how we use them in daily life, stems from, say, the 1960s prohibition and so on?
Yes.
Yeah, so...
And it's actually deeper than that. I mean, I'm a psychopharmacologist. I talk at international meetings of psychopharmacologists, and most of them still think these are dangerous, addictive drugs.
Yeah, like from my personal experience when regulating kratom in Czech Republic, I can say that we faced quite a lot of opposition coming from the Ministry of Health, but luckily we had some support coming from political parties, so it was much easier to actually put some regulatory sandbox over there. And second question for Francisca, when it comes to regulatory sandboxes, would you want to place regulatory sandboxes with EMA or with the national bodies, or generally somewhere with the European Commissions? Because right now there is also a lot of talk here in Brussels about innovation, how we can bring more innovation to Europe, bottlenecks, etc. So
yeah,
it's a right moment to actually put it 2 years to the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also why we are having this meeting now. We want to talk about these things now, but in fact, this is still something that is under development, and regulatory sandboxes, as we were talking about them, are a tool that's going to be solidified in the revision of the pharma regulation. So this is, we will see how it becomes solidified. But the way that it is being written now appears to be that it will be something overseen by the European Medicines Agency, maybe also co-developed with and then taken, so actually executed by individual countries. We imagine maybe, I don't know if there would be a voluntary taking part in the program, the sandbox, let's say, but it would be a joint effort, probably also in the development of the sandbox itself. But this to say, it is very early days, and that was precisely the goal also of the discussions today, was to shape how we can actually do this later. But we think it's important to talk about it now.
Okay, thank you. Like, I'm asking because later tonight also I will have some conversation with.
You can, yeah.
So I just got finished by saying, well, we've had such a good discussion. I haven't actually had to. We've had such a good discussion from you. I haven't actually had to tell you all the thoughts or my thoughts, but don't worry. In time, you will get them because I will be part of the sandbox. So thank you all. It's been a really extraordinary meeting today. So thanks for coming and thanks for sharing. And we will be in a continued dialogue with you all. And I'll hand over to Fred now just to tell you where to go.
Well, basically outside of the room, as Dave was suggesting, because there needs to be a reshuffle of the chairs. But on my side, thank you as well for your participation. It was a pleasure to moderate this morning, and congratulations to Tad, Francisca, and the rest of the team. Thank you, everyone. Safe journey, hope. And I think if you have like dirty cups and whatever, there is